as we mark Freedom Day, there is so much to be proud of in the 27 years since democracy, the country making great strides to become a modern democratic state. But inequality, poverty and unemployment remain the biggest obstacles to realizing a truly free dispensation. So as we take stock of the road traveled, we also look towards the future, and to help us do that, Xolelwa Kashe-Katiya is the project director of the Indlulamithi Scenarios. She joins us now via our video link. Xolelwa, it's always great to talk to you about all of these incredibly important and difficult issues as we try to make sense of Freedom Day, 27 years into our democracy. There is so much to be proud of, but we all need a reminder, don't we?
Yes, we do need a reminder. And good morning, Michelle, and thank you for having me once again, and good morning to your listeners and viewers at home.
Thank you.
Yes, I mean, it's a very difficult time for our country, especially with the rising inequality in the face of the COVID pandemic. And I think what we tend to do is to focus more on the negatives, and there's been certainly many of those. However, we must not forget, the meaning of our freedom as well. I'm reminded about, issues such as, freedom of expression, freedom of speech, freedom of association. We've had freedom to have same-sex marriages, which is something that other countries, which are supposedly more progressive, are only starting to realize only right now. We've got the LGBTQI community, even though there's challenges there, being able to live freely, adopt children, and so on. So we must not take those things lightly, but at the same time, we must be very mindful of all the challenges that we have, and those are the challenges of inequality, corruption, and just a very corrosive approach to our politics, the way we do business, and the way we associate with each other as citizens.
And I mean, it's on days like these that we look to our former leaders, the likes of Nelson Mandela, of Chris Hani, the leaders who, there are very few of that caliber, many would argue, in the South Africa 27 years into democracy. And we look at those quotes, that remind us of what we fought for all of those years ago and how far we've come. And one of those quotes is from Nelson Mandela, and he once talked about what it means to be free. On this Freedom Day, we're thinking about what does it mean to be free. And it isn't, according to Nelson Mandela in this quote, it isn't just about casting off one's chains.
It is realizing our economic freedom. It is, having a sense of dignity in how we live. And we know that most South Africans are living in conditions that are actually quite shocking. And this is a result of the deep inequalities that we have. And I appreciate that you actually reminded us of Chris Hani and, especially those who lost their lives, during the process of realizing our freedom. And there are those who would then wonder, if they really they died for our freedom. And it is quite poignant that we refer to Chris Hani, because this day, 27th of April, actually was announced as a result of the murder of Chris Hani. We were nowhere near finding each other during the negotiations. And some others would refer to that as a negotiated settlement. The tensions were so high, as we all remember what was happening during the Kodesa moment. And then during that period, while there were all these tensions and seemingly it looked like we're not going, Chris Hani gets murdered.
Yeah.
But as a way of stalling or actually getting us to stop and pause, Nelson Mandela had to announce the day of election, which was the 27th of April. And I don't think we should ever forget that. We tend to focus more on the act of voting on the 27th of April in 1994, but we must think about the history behind it, how that day came about, which was actually quite a painful process. And we were on the brink of conflict. And Nelson Mandela, the statement that he knew that if he had to announce that day, then it would quell a lot of anger, and we could sort of like move forward together as a nation. But we're still moving further apart. as we have seen recently.
Yeah. I mean, you talk about, the caliber of leaders we had in the build-up to this day. We talk about this day, our Freedom Day, but it was really the many, many years and the hard work by so many people who sacrificed their lives, the lives of their families. They sacrificed being present fathers, being present mothers, for the sake of our country's democracy. I want you to just, as we reflect on the caliber of leadership, to talk to us about, is it very simple to say that we just don't have that kind of caliber of leadership in our democratic South Africa 27 years on?
It is very difficult to say, because if you remember now, for the first time, it was multi-party elections where we had about 19 different parties, and all these people were coming from different formations. First, you had the three major apartheid political parties, but at the same time, you had all these liberation movements coming together. We had the Pan-Africanist Congress, you had the IFP, you had the ANC. But when you look at history right now, it seems like we tend to be very romantic. We tend to romanticize our history as if we had these great leaders in days, that have gone past. But when you look at history and the historical record, you find that some of the challenges, in particular in the ANC, because they do happen to have an archive that is accessible, you do realize that some of these challenges are actually from a long time ago, even when the ANC was still in exile. Some of those behaviors might have been carried through into the present, and they find a corrupt government that was the apartheid state, and then they joined, that infrastructure. So all these things are not new things that happened after 1994.
Yeah.
So it's very difficult to say those leaders, were honorable men and women. However, we do know now that some of the challenges were there long before the end of apartheid.
It's very interesting to take a look back at previous leaders who, in many ways, predicted what would happen should it be that, decades into democracy, we do have a corrupt governing party. And those were predictions made even in the build-up to Freedom Day, even in the build-up to 1994.
Yes, also we learned from other post-liberation countries. A lot of our leaders were in those countries as well, and surely they have, witnessed firsthand what happens, after liberation. So I think what we need to be looking at really is the state of post-liberation countries and how they find themselves or discover the trajectory going forward post-liberation, because some still behave as if they're liberation movements, whereas they are leaders of state. And you find that in some countries where there was a military action to realize their freedom, you'd find that continues into the present, where you have military dictatorships. And this is something that we do not have, and that's something we need to remind ourselves of when we compare ourselves to other countries who've had to fight for the liberation and what they have in the present.
Yeah.
And it is very difficult to say, but I find that it is actually a challenge that's facing actually most liberation countries that found their democracy or whatever dispensation they have as a result of a liberation struggle. So you find that there's a hangover from that moment that tends to be carried into the present.
Yeah. So, Xolelwa, you and I often talk when we are discussing various scenarios for the future of our country. In terms of the research that Indlulamithi does do, how can it offer us guidance on this day, 27 years since Freedom Day, how we can reshape our future so that we can move forward?
For us, we find that the biggest driver to the challenges that we have is the issue of inequality. As long as we are so unequal, we can never find each other as a nation. So that's one of the first things that needs to be taken care of, because it's driving us deeper and deeper into a state of lawlessness, a state of despair. And, it's just And what we found with our measurements every year, year on year with our barometer, that we're sinking deeper into what we call the Gwara nation, which is that state of lawlessness. So if you can harness the inequality and find ways to reduce it, and even during this crisis that we have, the global, there are opportunities to address the issues of inequality. For example, there's been this grant that's been offered. We know that a lot of people feel that this is actually a recipe for a nanny state, but we cannot have South Africans that live, without even the most basic income grant, because we've seen the need for it. We see those queues every day. So there are actually people who do require that, but that's still very small, and that's something that can happen in the most immediate. But we need to actually look at the structure of our economy, and that's one of the things that we found, that we need to look at these things at the micro level, but also at the macro level, because it is clear that the structure of the economy as it is, it's actually not doing much to reduce inequality. So we have to find a way to get the states, to get business, communities, you and I, all citizens together, to rally around a common vision. That vision could be a non-negotiable way we say we will reduce inequality, and all rally against that through a compact of sorts, where there are non-negotiables, where we can actually put things on the table, where we sacrifice some things, where we find compromise for the greater good of the country. But we have to find that one thing that all of us can commit to and rally around as a society. And I think inequality is one of the things that we can make a focal point and find ways to reduce inequality at local level, at macro level, in every way we exist.
Yeah, absolutely. Inequality, the biggest issue working against us on this Freedom Day. Xolelwa Kashe-Katiya, thank you so much, as always, for joining us here on the AM Report. You always give us so much to think about. She is the project director at Indlulamithi.